So my name's Chinda, and I'm with the MIT Bitcoin Club, and we have here Paul and M from Airbits, and so he's going to be telling us about a product that they've been working on called BitID. Paul?
Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Puey. I'm CEO and co-founder of Airbits, and we are a platform for Bitcoin and blockchain solutions. So we do private key security for Bitcoin and for other applications as well. Let me just we're going to just deep dive right into the slide deck. I can show my presentation.
Sure.
That sound good? All right, yeah, let's go right into it. Let me just on screen here.
All right. Looks good.
That looks good. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I can advance through the slides okay. I might have to put a little in there. But okay, well, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm going to talk about BitID authentication, secure logins with no passwords, and how we kind of have built some solutions around that. So awesome. But BitID, one thing you had mentioned that it's something that we had built. We actually didn't build BitID. BitID is an open protocol that anybody can develop on. So websites can use BitID to accept authentication versus a username and password. And at the same time, wallets or other software can actually implement the BitID protocol on the client side to allow their app to authenticate with various sites. So it's not something that we had specifically built. It's not closed source. It's actually an open protocol that anyone can utilize. Let's go into what exactly BitID is trying to solve. So we have what everyone knows is kind of the password problem. Passwords need to be fairly long and hard to guess, have a lot of different types of entropy, uppercase, lowercase numbers and whatnot. One of the biggest challenges is that we need it to be different on every website and service. This is probably the biggest pain point of passwords. Most humans can remember one really good password. It's really hard to make it different for every website, let alone pretty much impossible. And ideally changed on a regular basis, having it rotate. And that way, if someone tries to guess one or hacks one service, it doesn't compromise that password on another one. So this is pretty challenging for a human to handle. In addition, even with the capacity of being able to know and have good passwords, it's hard to use, right? They're fairly tedious. They're easy to phish, fake websites that present a fake password entry. Potentially allow someone to snoop on what you've typed in, or just snoop over your shoulder, and they're easily forgotten. Like we had mentioned, when they're long and cryptic, it's easier to forget passwords. So this is what kind of encompasses a lot of motivation to build better technology such as BitID. And so with this password problem, one of the key issues with passwords is that they generally sit on a centralized server. They might be hashed, but if you compromise passwords on one server, that potentially gives the hacker access to a bunch of other accounts that you may have on other servers without even having to hack them. And this had happened with a few different websites, especially forums that have very low security. You hack a low security forum, but then you gain passwords that give you access to potentially bank accounts. So what's a possible solution? Well, BitID and its public-private key authentication. In the same sense with Bitcoin, and we're speaking here to the MIT Bitcoin Club, so you guys are familiar with the fact that blockchains, Bitcoin's blockchain and other future blockchains use public keys or public addresses on the blockchain to associate with some type of value, whether it be money or a smart contract. And it uses private keys, which are held by the individual, the owner of that asset, to authenticate with the blockchain, right? You sign a message with a private key that signifies you own and proves your ownership of that asset on a blockchain. Well, we can do that with blockchain, but it is also possible for us to do that with any website or app. A website can send a message that it wants you to sign with your private key, send back the signed message, and the website says, okay, well, that's you, because I know your public key or public address is, and you've proven through the signature that you are who you are. Well, what does public-private key authentication kind of look like? Well, it's a challenge response mechanism, and it helps eliminate usernames and passwords with signatures. So a challenge gets sent by a website, like I had mentioned earlier, gets received at, say, a user's mobile device, which holds the private key, and signs the challenge, which is effectively a random token, sends the random token or the message with the signature back to a server, and the server, which has the public key of the end user, which was registered from before, can verify the signature. And the beauty of this is that websites effectively can hold just public keys. They don't have to hold passwords. And the beauty of that is the hack of one website does not compromise other websites that the user might have public keys on, right? I hack one website, all it has is public keys. It doesn't have private keys. That doesn't enable me in any way, shape, or form to go and access any other websites. And this is a huge value proposition with respect to public-private key security over just usernames and passwords. So this is what BitID is using is fairly tried and true technology. Public-private key authentication has been used easily for almost 20 years. For any of the technologists out there in the room listening to this cast, you may be familiar with SSH or secure shell command line access into a remote server. And this has been built into SSH for years now, where people can put a public key on a remote server and authenticate with that server using a private key that sits on their local machine. And it's pretty seamless. You type SSH, your username, and the name of a server. And if it's been kind of paired in the past, then you just suddenly logged in. No password to enter, no passwords to snoop, no phishing. It's fairly elegant. So we've been using it for 20 years, but we just haven't used it for the end user. It's been relegated to technologists, IT managers, not to just regular casual people. So what are the technical details of BitID? Like, what does it actually look like going on underneath the covers? Well, if a website supports BitID, they generally have a QR code or a button that's placed on the website. And the button itself has, just like most buttons that link to another site, this one has a link, but instead of it being HTTP, it's BitID : and then the website, and a callback URL, which is where to send the signed message, and then a nonce. And a nonce is just a random number. It's the message you sign, similar to signing a Bitcoin transaction. The wallet scans. So say you have a mobile wallet, you scan the QR code, you then sign the URL with a private key. The wallet sends that signed message back to the website at the callback address. It just kind of does a post to that callback address. And the website can verify that the signature matches a pre-registered public key, public address, and then you're logged in. So what does this effectively look like if you were to try and do this? What does it feel like? Let me see if I can get this video to play here, but I've got a little recording of what it looks like to log into a website, and we have our partner here, Glidera, that does a buy-sell solution integrated into Airbits. Let's see if I get this to play here. Hit play. So this is me just logging into a website. Go to their website, log in with BitID. It's got a QR code, and I'm going to launch the Airbits app here. It's got a QR code scanner. Simply scan this QR code. Ask me if I want to log in, verify that the website's correct, hit yes. And that's instantly signing in, boom, just like that. Right there, it signed the nonce, sent it to the callback URL, Glidera verified it, and I'm logged in. Pretty seamless, much easier than using a username and password. So you might ask, well, what if I'm on my phone and I'm trying to log into a website that is also on my phone, right? How do I scan the QR code? Well, actually, in that sense, it's actually even easier. There's no QR code to scan. You can actually just use a button because buttons embed URLs. And so I've got another video here of what that looks like when you're logging in on a phone. Also fairly seamless. So tap the launch BitID, goes into my app. Yes, and then there you go. And now you're logged in. Go back to the website, and I'm automatically logged in just like that. So in a way, we're providing a more seamless user experience while also providing higher level of security. And this is rarely offered in our space. Usually it's always a compromise. All right, is it better user experience or is it better security? Rarely do you get both, but for the first time, we actually get both. Super rare. And BitID even has potential protocol extensions that we're really excited about. So in addition to a website requesting a signature, like, hey, sign this thing for us, and then send it back, a website can actually ask for additional personal info. So to register an account with a BitID website, it can be as simple as just scanning a QR code. Filling out what password do you want, what username do you want. Literally, you scan a QR code, that registers your public address, and then your account is created. But most websites want more than just a public address so that you can log in the future. They want a little bit of info, at least like an email address, maybe your name, maybe an image, like a photo of yourself. Well, this protocol metadata extension allows a website to add something at the end of the request. This S equals EUP is an example of asking for additional fields. E signifies email, U signifies user or their name, P is photo or picture. And what the phone can then do is say, okay, hey user, would the wallet such as Airbit's can ask, oh, this website would like access to your email and your name and your photo. Would you like to grant it access to these things? You say yes, then it sends that over to the website, and then boom, you didn't have to fill out any forms. You didn't actually have to type all of that in. It just automatically sends it to them with your permission. So this can streamline not just logging in, but also authenticating or creating accounts on new services, which really drives a lot of great adoption for this protocol because it actually is just something simpler to use. This might actually start to sound familiar. You're probably familiar with the single sign-on that a lot of people use with Google, Facebook, Twitter, where instead of having to create an account, you just say log in with Google, log in with Facebook. So although similar in user experience, they have a very different trust model. Instead of your device owning the private key or owning your data that it will individually share with another website, when you use these single sign-on methods with Google, Facebook, and Twitter, really it's Google that's owning the keys to authenticate with this third-party website, and it's Facebook owning the data which it's going to share. And so effectively, a successful hack onto one of these services could, in essence, log on to all the websites that you use Google for to authenticate to. That's a kind of a dangerous centralized model. And in essence, what Bitcoin has motivated is to move away from that centralized model of trust, and instead towards a decentralized model of trust. So instead of relying on those services, you're relying on your device to secure private keys and data, which you send peer-to-peer to a single website that you want to authenticate to or share data with. We think that's pretty powerful. So it begs the question, so it sounds great, right? Why haven't we been using this? You know, it sounds like it's a benefit. It's both more secure and it's easier to use. Why it's more private. Why haven't we been using this? So one of the challenges of this model of public-private key authentication is that people need to be able to secure private keys. And for quite a long time, end users have not been good at securing private keys because it requires things like encryption so that no one has access to those keys. Requires backup because there's no way you're going to remember a private key easily. You've got to back it up somehow. And then you want to be able to access your keys from multiple devices. You go home, you've got maybe a desktop at work, and you've got your laptop at home, and maybe it's your phone as well. So data synchronization is really key. And the average user does not know how to utilize any of these technologies. Right? It just hasn't really been a necessity for most people. Well, the beauty of what Bitcoin has motivated is that it's motivated key management, right? Pretty much every wallet that you use for Bitcoin, other than the hosted wallets or the kind of the banks of Bitcoin, every real decentralized wallet is a key manager, and it just implements key management in different ways. Some are local client-side encryption, backup, and synchronization like Airbits, and that's how we do it, or Mycelium, where you write down your keys, or software like Ledger, which secures the key on a hardware device. So you have different solutions for key management, and so hence you have now different solutions for authentication key management. And these three wallets are actually three that support BitID, and you can use any of them to authenticate with BitID compatible websites. And so what do we do? What's our aim for key management? So we do believe in encryption, backup, and synchronization, keeping security for keys as familiar to users as possible. So we have an edge security platform that we build our Bitcoin wallet on top of. And it automatically encrypts all of the user's data on the device. It's zero knowledge. No one can access the data, private keys, or any other data other than the end user. And the data is also automatically backed up. So that way, if the user loses their device, they can still access their data from another one. And it automatically synchronizes their data between devices so that if they have multiple devices, they have access to the same data. And we can roll back corrupted data in case a phone corrupts some data for them. We can roll it back. We have the option for lost password recovery, which is in and of itself very unique in the encryption space. And we've implemented what we call one-touch two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication for the platform that's nearly invisible. No text messages to receive, no emails to receive. You just enable it and you're done. And we've rolled this out, in our own mobile app. Even though it's also a Bitcoin wallet, it's a key manager, really, right? It secures private keys. And the familiarity of creating one account with arguably still a username and password, but that one account can secure private keys for both money and authentication. Gives you easy access to your account using just a PIN or Touch ID based login. I'd mentioned two-factor, and you can just scan with a QR code to register a new user on a BitID site or scan to log into a website. So what are we securing in our app? Obviously, we secure private keys for digital assets. And to people, digital assets can mean a lot of things. It can mean Bitcoin. It can mean authentication keys to authenticate with services like Lidera for buying and selling Bitcoin. And it can be also for other digital values such as gift cards. And in our app, we secure gift cards and enable people to acquire gift cards at a discount because of the Bitcoin economy, right? 20% off on Starbucks. Actually, right now, about 8% off on Target. And we encourage people that actually use those companies to not ever pay full price and actually, try Airbits out to save some money on Starbucks and Target, and more merchants are coming soon. And so we can't obviously take credit for most of BitID. It was primarily driven by the folks over at Ledger and Eric Larchevek, who had done a lot of the proposals, and I pitched in a few changes to the protocol for protocol extensions. But we think it's a great protocol. We encourage people to contribute to it, whether on a technical side or to implement it onto their websites, and encourage users to use it because it puts them at a smaller risk of account hacking. And then nudge them towards software implementations such as Bitcoin wallets that allow them to use the private keys for Bitcoin to also authenticate to websites. So if you want any additional information, check out the GitHub page, github.com/bitid, or you can contact us, me, Paul at airbits.co, or Eric over at Ledger. And that's it. Thanks, folks.
Excellent.
I have questions.
Oh, sweet. I have questions.
Yeah, do you have any questions?
Yeah. Who has questions? So if you can answer those.
Yeah, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to go and fire away.
Go ahead.
Two questions, very different. First of all, what is the recovery system that you alluded to? And the second one is, how is the signing protocol different from what FIDO uses? Or is it different from what FIDO would use?
Great questions. So when you were talking about the recovery mechanism, that's specific to Airbits, not BitID, I presume. So what does Airbits use as the recovery mechanism?
Yes.
We have one currently deployed, and we have what we call kind of our login 2.0 recovery mechanism in development that we're really excited about. So the first recovery mechanism is actually fairly simple, although a simple implementation, although a little bit tedious for the user. So it's the familiar questions and answers for recovery. So the user sets up, I think it's 6 personal questions and answers, and we take the answers and they're hashed. They effectively become a second password that can decrypt their data. Simple as that. It can authenticate with our servers to download their encrypted data, and it can also decrypt their data at the same time. The pain point of that is because it is a decryption key, it needs to have really good entropy. So there are a lot of questions, and the answers have to be a minimum length. And so for some people, it's saved their butt. They're like, oh my God, I forgot my password, but I set up recovery questions. Great. For other people, it's like, whoa, these answers are pretty long. I'll just write down my password and stick it in a safe, that kind of thing. So it is a solution. It's worked for a lot of people, but we have in development another solution which we think is going to be fairly elegant, which effectively takes the recovery questions and is able to reduce it out to fairly low entropy, just a couple of questions that are easier to create an answer. The difference is, instead of the decryption key being the answers to the questions, the key is a key that's actually split between our server and their device. So we save it on their device. We also have them email it to themselves, put it into like their iCloud keychain, just back it up in as many ways as possible. But the key is split. So no one key can decrypt their data. And the answers to their questions then are answers that are also hashed, but then we can rate limit on our server. So they have to send it to our server, and the server says, okay, those answers are correct. Here's the other half of your key. And with both the half that's provided by our server and the half that's stored in their device, they can go ahead and decrypt the data on their phone. So that provides a much, much more usable password recovery mechanism that still provides kind of split trust. So you're still not trusting any one authority with the ability to get access to your account, but at the same time, it's easy to set up and really can save people. And I'm glad you asked that question, because we have a focus on that, is that security is not just securing yourself from attackers, but it's also securing yourself securing your data from yourself, because you are also one point of failure. So it's a super important point. And we aim to keep driving that usability for end users.
To keep on that thread for one more second, systems like Uport, for example, are using a multi-sig approach to doing this. Again, it's pretty much the same thing you just said, but it doesn't necessarily depend on you holding some of the keys. You could spread those keys around to people you trust separately from you. Is there a big difference between what you're doing and any other multi-sig type approach?
Yeah, so the main difference, really this is multi-sig except for the fact that signatures can't encrypt data. So the difference is signatures with private keys are a way of signing. And so multi-signature is the way to split the key between multiple entities. But when it comes to encryption, you're actually encrypting the data, then it's just cutting up the key and dividing it up between multiple entities. So you can do things like Shamir secret, take the key and Shamir secret it 3 of 5, and that brings it together. Armory did that prior to multisig. So there's different ways to slice it, and we happen to choose what we think is mass adoptable. Like, what can the average person actually adopt? If I said, here, create an account, you need to do recovery. Oh, now go pick 3 of your friends that you trust to hold different keys, or pick various entities to hold parts of these keys that can decrypt your data. That becomes a friction point that could make it nearly unusable, where people just go, I don't know what to think of, right? And then they just drop it. So we want to make sure that the solution is one that people can actually use. And so we found that this is a solution that's fairly adoptable, especially if we can reduce and compress the number of questions and the level of entropy to the answers needed. We can be that one other party, but without having full trust in us, because we never want to be the one entity that you have to fully trust.
I buy it.
Sweet.
And then the FIDO-like question.
The FIDO-like question. I haven't looked at the exact encryption. My understanding is they don't use the exact elliptic curve cryptography that Bitcoin uses. So probably still solid and entirely secure. The nice thing is I think this problem has been attacked by multiple companies repeatedly in the past, and it's, it can be deployed. There's no good reason why we haven't used it. The challenge is kind of getting the ball rolling, getting to the point where it's like, okay, we're getting enough steam and traction in at least one target industry that it starts to develop traction in other industries. So similar to Facebook, Facebook focused on like one very concrete location demographic and achieved good adoption there, which then spread outside of first their local campus to other colleges, and then people that aren't even in colleges. So we think that the beauty of this is that we can focus in a community that understands private key management, right? Bitcoin people understand that they need private key management, and websites realize that they need good security for people to authenticate, especially exchanges. So exchanges need good security for their users to authenticate with these services. So by trying to achieve, and this is still early, like we're still early in on doing the biz dev to drive people to adopt this, hence us talking to you, by being able to drive this public-private key authentication solution within the crypto space, we're hoping that it gets mass adopted there to then drive it into other industries. And whether that's FIDO or BitID, in all honesty, it's not terribly important which one. We're hopping on BitID because it's easy for crypto companies to implement, because they already have the technology there. Like, wallets already have the technology to do the elliptic curve signatures that Bitcoin provides. Chances are exchanges on their backend already have the technology incorporated to be able to do the verification. So it's more seamless. It's less of a friction point for them to adopt than potentially other tech that's out there and available that can do a similar and great job. And there's been other proposals, but haven't had a good focus.
Good.
Sweet. So question and answers are available on the Hangouts if you are online and you want to ask a question, but I also have a few.
Yeah, for sure.
So how much of a replacement do you see this as for PGP? Do you see this as a way for people to identify themselves to each other? Do you see a future where you could use a system like this to authenticate yourself when you're like SSHing into a server?
Oh, absolutely. If anything, I mean, this SSH servers, although using a different elliptic curve, already support effectively this. And the only thing is that with SSH, we're on the command line, so we can put the private key inside of inside of the computer. Technically speaking, you could build an SSH app that runs on your phone with your wallet, and the wallet could be the thing that signs the message to authenticate with SSH, or you put a Bitcoin wallet on your desktop and it authenticates using a private key onto an SSH server. What I think is a more realistic kind of mass adoptable solution is just trying to solve the problem for the layperson, not the technologists that already know how to deal with private keys, but for just general websites and also private blockchains. So private blockchains will eventually need some type of private key security, and all the companies that have been building key managers such as us start to fit into that space. Like, okay, well, you got to secure these keys, and in a way those chains are no different than just a website. So to kind of go back to your question of, do I see this as something that we could use for SSH and other protocols? Well, they kind of already have the solution. They're the choir, right? Why preach to the choir? Those people already see how awesome it is to just use SSH versus a username and password. To us, it's the layperson and solving those problems. And where I see the future growth is not just authenticating, but I'm really, really excited about being able to prove my identity, not just to a website, but to a door, right? Take my NFC phone and tap a door. And I went, when I first, say checked into a hotel, they had me sign a message with a pad with my phone using NFC that registered my public address with the hotel. And then now I go up to the door and I can just tap my phone and I'm in. And with respect to identity, we simply need a trusted central authority, whether that be a blockchain like Namecoin or a service like OneName that registers a very specific public address that identifies us. And with that, we can then sign messages using BitID that authenticate who we are. Because the way BitID works is you actually use a different public and private key for every website. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like an HD wallet. HD wallet, you have an index. This is public and private address 1, and then 2, and then 3, and 4. And every time you can change an address, you get another one. Well, BitID works in a similar way, except that instead of deriving your private key and public address by just iterating, you derive it using the website's URL. So every website, you're actually going to register a different public address, right? For privacy's sake, if someone compromises one website, they won't be able to tell that that's you on another website using the same public address matching. But that doesn't work well for being able to authenticate who you are to different services, because it's a different public address everywhere. However, it's a super small protocol extension to say, okay, I want to sign who I am and prove who I am. That's kind of my global identity. Therefore, use this specific derivation, right? This derivation is what I want to use, which is like, it's my Namecoin derivation. And wherever I go, I use my Namecoin derivation to prove who I am. Like at the airport, instead of providing my passport, I just sign a message. And somewhere else, that public address is already associated with me. So I am excited about that from an identity management point of view.
Nice. So then is this, so like the use case for this service, what do you think about like LastPass? How do you feel about the security model?
So LastPass, in and of itself, you guys asked the great questions. This is amazing. So I'm a fan of LastPass, but I also know a lot of its weaknesses. And LastPass's security model at its heart is similar to what Airbits has built, except that we've tried to make it far, far more rock solid without as many Swiss cheese holes in it. But from the viewpoint of what LastPass is being used for, with storing usernames and passwords, they're stuck with this really, really challenging guessing game. Because where do you stick the password into a website? Where do you stick the username into a website? And so I don't know if people are aware of this, is there's a major security flaw in LastPass that they necessarily have to have, which is when you use LastPass, in order for them to know where to fill in the forms, they actually have dynamic JavaScript that they download from their server that's custom for many different websites. And that tells where to put it in. Problem is, since they're downloading that custom code pretty much on every login, a compromise to LastPass's servers could download compromised JavaScript, which could steal your usernames and passwords. Right? So they're a client-side app, but it's a very dynamically changing client-side app over and over and over again. It's changing every time you go and do a login. And that was identified by a few security researchers a while back. Now, if they had integrated BitID and more websites integrated BitID, then LastPass would be very simple. There's very little there. There's not having to guess which website. It's just tap to log in. Could be very, very elegant, and they could eliminate a lot of the security risks of guessing where to put the forms. And then also LastPass is a great form filler. right? It fills out credit card info, name, address, email, all of that stuff. But all of that is a guessing game. And in that guessing game, they have to download this custom JavaScript that's different for each website, whereas that could simply be BitID. And if they can encrypt and secure, like the way Airbits does, your personal info, they can easily fill that into the forms using a very discrete protocol versus the guessing game that they have to do. So I think a lot of their value add is the guessing game they do because they do it well, but it also decreases their security. And with more broad adoption of BitID, LastPass actually becomes a very, very simple app.
Okay, interesting. So one more question, which I think you answered, in your presentation, which was from another club member, which was, how can we trust people with using their private keys when we can't trust people with like creating secure passwords and using their passwords all the time, making sure that that they don't leak their private key and that they keep their private key safe.
Right. So that's about us building better technology. And we could not before trust people to deal with private keys simply because the technology wasn't mature enough. Encryption was very hard to use, if not non-existent. And backup software was challenging to use. And so if I could see the audience and say, how many people raise their hand to actually back up their computer or any of their files on there? I mean, this is MIT, so I'm guessing quite a few people might actually say, hey, of course I do. But you go to an average room of people and they're like, backup? This is why cloud software has become so popular, because we basically outsource our backup and security to someone else. But the challenge of outsourcing is now you create a huge target for people to attack. It's just like a bank, but now with data. So why we think that we can in the future trust people is because now that Bitcoin has created this huge motivation to give users good encryption backup solutions. And because it's now so important, it's more important now than it was before. We will develop the technology kind of like what we focused on with Airbits, technology that makes it where the average person can manage private keys, and that complex tech just hides under the covers. The same way the internet early on, how do you install and compile Mozilla to access a website and telnet into things? Now it's kind of just hidden under the covers, and you type in a simple address, or you don't even type in an address, you type in, Google guesses it for you, So all of that is just a maturation, is that even a word? Maturation process of the tech created by the necessity. And we have not had the necessity before, but that was one of the beauties of Bitcoin. It's created the necessity for this better tech. And I encourage people to try using Airbits and see if they feel comfortable introducing it to their mom and what the hiccups are. We're not perfect, but we'll see. And whatever those hiccups are, we'll try to improve it so that mom and dad and grandpa can use digital currency and secure private keys for BitID.
Okay. You gave an excellent presentation. Thanks, Paul.
Oh, no problem.
I have another question. If there's time.
We have another question.
Is he still there?
Yep.
I'm still here.
Paul, I have a related application that would benefit greatly from your private key management technology. It's also an open protocol called UMA, which stands for User Managed Access.
Okay.
It is a profile, if you would, of OAuth 2, just like OpenID Connect is a profile, in effect, of OAuth 2. I suspect you're familiar with OpenID Connect, given the business you're in. Have you heard of UMA?
I have heard of it, but I don't know the specific protocol details of it. And of course, I've heard OpenID, but I don't know all of those terms. Yeah.
Yeah. What happens in UMA is that the user, the individual, runs an authorization server of their own. So it's part of this decentralized universe that Bitcoin obviously is, and you're part of. And this authorization server is then introduced to the various relying parties, just like you would introduce your wallet, or you would introduce your FIDO token or your app. So the role of the authorization server is to sign tokens for clients based on your policies. So in other words, your authorization server, because it's online, you don't have to actually go and do the OAuth dance each and every time somebody wants to connect to a resource that you own. they come to your authorization server, and your authorization server does the OAuth dance and signs the token, and they get in. Did I go too fast?
Is this authorization server something that an end user runs for themselves, or is this for a website?
Model, yes, it doesn't have to be. As with everything, it's just like you can run your own OpenID provider too, if
Right.
you wanted to, but it doesn't make too much sense in many cases. But yes, my particular work, which is called HIE of One, is in healthcare primarily, but it involves the user owning their own authorization server. And what is difficult about that is controlling the private keys. The authorization server wants to be like a virtual machine. It wants to be online. It could be your Freedom Box,
Right.
or it could be just a virtual machine somewhere, and it doesn't really matter to the protocol at all. But the user needs to control the private keys that are associated with that authorization server. And it seems to me like you've solved 2 or 3 of the problems with running a personal authorization server. Number one, you've got a way of signing into the authorization server. Number 2, you have a way of synchronizing the private keys that are going to be used by the authorization server to represent you in the OAuth protocol. Because you have this, in effect, your phone and the authorization server are 2 different versions of you.
It can be, absolutely.
Right. So, this, again, we could probably take this offline if you're interested, but this becomes an interesting add-on because it's in the same universe and complementary to what you're doing, just like a Bitcoin wallet is complementary to what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to take the conversation offline, and this is exactly what we're looking for, other projects that could take advantage of, both BitID technology and also the edge security technology that we've built. And so, and this can, the stuff that we built can secure private keys, but private key is nothing more than just data. And so we're a generic data security model too, which can hold some additional information, synchronize additional information like personal information. That's not just private keys, but name, address, phone number. So this potentially can fit with exactly what you're building. I'd be happy to talk afterwards.
Great, thank you.
Cool. That's it. Good work.
Very, very cool. All right. Well, yeah, if anyone has any other questions, you could reach me. I had my email there briefly up there, but paul@airbits.co. Hope to one day actually be over there in Boston and be able to meet some of the club personally. I've been to a couple of meetups actually over in the Boston area, but we're quick stopovers. So would love to sync up with the club sometime in the future.
All right. See you then.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot for having me.